So if you can tell us a little bit about your early years, your schooling, your college, and your aspirations and ambitions that led you to where you are today.
Well, firstly, Sanjay, thanks for the introduction, and let me also add that it's nice to be here. I've been interacting with a few of the younger people here. It's very energizing. Seem to be a lot of exciting things going on. And so in terms of my own, younger years, as you asked, frankly, I'm very lucky in having had a sort of a youth and education where my dad being in the army, I literally grew up around the country. I think some of you who read about me may know that I say I've been in 12 schools by the time I was 12 years old. But luckily thereafter, I was able to finish school in one place, and that was in Lucknow. And then went on to do my engineering in Roorkee. And then many years later an MBA.
Ah, okay. But then in terms of your own goal setting, the aspirations that you had, when would you say those kind of got formed?
Well, I must tell you, and I'm not sure how much that will apply to youth today. I think when you began your career, you had absolutely no idea. I think if we had set dreams for ourselves at that stage, they would have fallen far short of reality. We would have been limited by our dreams because we didn't know that the world was going to evolve like it did. The IT industry as we know it today didn't even exist.
Right.
And I will give you other examples of people who, if they set aspirations, would Narayan Murthy ever have visualized as he finished college that he would go on to lead India's most respected and admired IT company? Or with Mr. Madhavan and I think that he was going to lead India's first mission to the moon. I think these are things which evolve, and one aspect of setting aspirations is, I think you must have dreams, but you must reset those dreams because you have no idea how far things can evolve for you as you go ahead. Some of the opportunities that you'll see don't even exist today, you can't even think about it. But I'm sure if we had such exciting opportunities which evolve for us in our lifetimes, I think it will be much better for this generation because it's going to get bigger, larger, more expansive, and frankly the pace of change is not going to slow down, it's going to keep on increasing.
You made an interesting point about having to recalibrate your dreams as one learns and progresses through one's own career and life. And you decided to become an entrepreneur a little later in your own career than, I suppose, a large number of the crowd here.
Some of them
straight to college, I suppose.
Some of them seem to be doing it even by themselves.
Exactly. So it would be interesting if you can share with us your own thought process about and the advantages, disadvantages that you see. Between starting off late, early, and all that.
So let's say that, let's classify entrepreneurs, if you will, into three groups. What I'll call as early stage, middle stage, we put in, say, maybe at least 7 to 10 years or maybe even 15 years of experience. And then a late stage entrepreneur like myself. And although, of course, when I got in, I was really late stage in the sense I had, at the age of 59, I had got a 30 plus years experience. But out of that, we're going to remember that I had begun in IT only in the current field because I was in solid engineering prior to that. So I had 15 plus years of experience in IT. Now let's see what happens for the, let me start with the late stage, which is where I am, and then perhaps explain to you some of the issues which would apply in the other cases. I think one of the biggest advantages of being a late stage entrepreneur is that if you bring a track record and you bring experience, I think you're going to find it easier taking care of the two major things which help you get started. And that is that you'll be building a team because you're able to get people out of the networks that you've had over the years, people who perhaps worked with you in the past, and clearly say all my teams would have come out of a past ecosystem, whether it was when we began Mindtree or now in Happiest Minds. And so the team building part as well as getting the people buy into the idea because you've got a track record. And the VCs, community will typically bet on people and then people with a certain track record. It makes it easier, and it makes it easier to plan on a larger scale. But then that's also necessary because you're making up for lost time. So you do need to plan on a larger scale, you don't have the luxury of time. So I think these are some of the things which apply to a late stage entrepreneur. Now when I come to the mid stage, and here's a common point between mid and late stage, is I think they are people with years of experience, they know certain industries well. They look for new entry strategies, but primarily they will work in areas where they have worked before. So that it may be an extension and say, okay, what's new within that industry? It's not that they're going to embark on something which they really don't know anything about. Because what they're bringing to the table is the experience that they have in a given segment which they understand well. So it is very largely based on existing knowledge. You could say the mid-stage guys hopefully got more energy and more years ahead in terms of a runway to be able to look at where he wants to take the organization. Now when it comes to the young, people who are going straight into entrepreneurship virtually out of college or after maybe 1 or 2 years in the market, one energizing thought I might want to leave behind with you is, if you look at 3 of the organizations which have probably had the greatest impact on the way things have evolved in high-tech over the years, and I'm not sure if I should call the last company as high-tech, which I'm going to give you the examples of, but the 3 companies which have had this greatest impact, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, all 3 of them started by people, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and now our latest gentleman, Mark Zuckerberg. None of them completed college. So you could say that obviously completion of your college or getting years of experience is not a prerequisite to create the largest. But the danger in that sort of thinking is that for every one of those successes, there must be 100 failures. And so therefore what would happen, I would imagine, with early stage entrepreneurs, 2 or 3 things. One is, I think there's much higher likelihood of doing something completely new, because you don't have any experience. Experience in that sense is a problem, because you then just want to be able to do some extensions of the past. Somebody who doesn't have any experience, has got an idea, is probably going to do something radically different, and which has not been done before, and that is why the potential of those ideas is very high. And per contra, so there's a higher reward, but there's also a higher risk. The other, of course, issue there is that you have to be able to bootstrap, build slowly. If you get funding, it will probably be angel funding, because people are going to hesitate to give you large sums of money unless you even Google, it took them years, I'm told, before they got their first $1 million check. And the guy who gave them that check, Ram Shriram, probably became as wealthy as the 2 entrepreneurs behind, because at that stage the company was valued at such a low level. And concurrent with that, therefore, is the other thought that until you can build valuation in an enterprise, when you go out to raise funds, I think you've got to be clear, can you bootstrap? How long can you do that for, so that you build a certain amount of value before you go out and get the money? Because once you've given away equity, you can't get it back. So a few basic thoughts here.
Sure. And it's also very interesting, because at different stages, you talked about the early and the mid and the late stage, there are different thought processes that go through the mind of the entrepreneur.
Sure.
When he or she decides to become one. So what were the kinds of your own drivers that led you to create Mindtree and now Happiest Minds?
Sure. I'm sure that driver is very different for different people. I'm told that one of the drivers for anybody is supposed to be creation of wealth. And I must say, in all honesty, for myself, that when I was leaving Wipro, for example, I hadn't a clue what was the value of the stock options that I had, or more importantly, the stock options I was walking away from. Because if I was, I'd say, oh my God, I'm going to do so many crores, how can I take that decision? And yet, by not thinking of it, and yet I must again tell you, that at times I suddenly realized, and this is in the Mindtree to Happiest Minds transition, if I had not had that degree of wealth, it would be more difficult to have got started. So yes, maybe wealth should be a bigger objective, and probably is for most people. It may not have been for me in my own career. I think the drivers are to do something new, to do something different, to create your own legacy, to something on which you want to leave your own imprint and say that this is what we did, either in terms of a new product, new service, something different which was brought to the world. It is the mindset of the inventor which says, I'm doing something which perhaps others have not done before, or in a way which has never been done before. So it could be an idea which gets translated into either a new product or a new service. And I believe that most entrepreneurs really get driven by the idea.
So the passion behind the idea is the real driver, and the wealth creation happens as a kind of corollary to that effort.
I know it need not necessarily be that way. It could be that one becomes the pieces, and I say that's because you're talking of individuals. Each one will have his own rushes.
Okay. And I had the opportunity to talk with Vinod Khosla a month back in a similar format, and he said a very interesting thing. He said, "My willingness to fail gives me the ability to succeed."
Yeah.
So how would you characterize your own experiences.
Sure.
And
you know, I have heard this statement obviously from, that we talk of really successful serial entrepreneurs, there's hardly anybody, and then he went on to become obviously one of the most successful VCs. And is again within that transformed himself several times. Now, here I would say 2 or 3 things about failure. One, I think a lot of people will tell you, all the management gurus, that you must learn from your failures. And of course you should. But I must also say another part of that, and that is you must also learn from your successes. And I'll give you an analogy. I think if you watched a really tight game, take many sports, I can give you tennis as a one-to-one as a better example. When you see a real champion, sometimes almost on the verge of losing, and they say this is going to be a disaster now, that person will suddenly turn things around and win. And I tell you, they do it by replicating their success. You can virtually visualize a person saying, now let me do the best I've ever done. Produce that unreturnable serve or that passing volley or whatever it is, which in a sense brings about the success. So yes, there has to be learning from failure also. I know there's another angle about willingness to fail, and I'm going to come to that. But I think it's very important that you build on your success. I want to talk about a research study where 2 groups of people were given a problem. And then the results were sort of surfaced, and they found that there were random groups brought together with similar backgrounds. The scores were at that point in time the same. One group was told all that they did exceedingly well. Another group was told all that they did badly. And then they were told, go back and do the experiment again. The group which was told the positives, their scores went up dramatically, and the group which were given their negatives remained maybe languishing around. The reason is that when you build on your success, actually you're going to see more upside. So I think that's an important part of success versus failure. Second part is, and I'll make a distinction here between failure and mistakes. I must tell you, everybody will make innumerable mistakes. If you ask me in my own, just those 10, 11 years of Mindtree, how many mistakes we made, which cost us upwards of $500,000 per mistake. Different mistakes, not the same one over and over again. But certainly there were more than, somewhere between 6 to 10. Now that's a lot of money, but remember I'm talking of blowing it up over a period of 10 years, and obviously we did something else right which made up for those. So there will be mistakes. Don't let them set you back so much that then it leads into, in a sense, despondency. Because that's another thing that an entrepreneur must avoid. And that is not getting carried away by early successes and high highs, and also not succumbing to low lows. That's incidentally a phrase I picked up from Kamal Rekhi when I first read it. I'm sure I should acknowledge it. Now finally I come to this point about the willingness to fail, which Vinod has talked about. I think all of us, obviously, so what is all business is about taking risks. So to a certain extent, I'd say it was an axiom. After all, if you're getting into business, you are going to have risks. The issue really is this, that in my view, you should never take a risk which bets the company. That's the point. So of course there should be, so that is why I equated it with failure versus mistake. Now, he from a VC's angle probably looks at it also as saying, in Silicon Valley they say that the best bet is a failed entrepreneur. Where somebody has actually failed, now that's not a mistake, the company's gone down the drain, perhaps blown up X million dollars of money, and yet when the entrepreneur comes back for a second round, second attempt, saying I'm going to be able to build on my past experience, that person is hopefully going to do better. I don't think we built that psychology in India as yet. And I think that's where this issue of being willing to fail, but I wouldn't carry it too far. In the sense that, of course, because by definition, if you're in business, you're taking a risk.
Sure. Okay. At the same time, one mustn't de-risk it,
excessively.
So that the reward is not worth the
risk. Contra, when you're running that business, remember, you are going to take bets, and those bets should not. There will be innumerable things don't work out, like those $500,000 plus mistakes I talked about, but they shouldn't bet the company.
Okay. Now, one of the important aspects of entrepreneurship is, while you as the entrepreneur have the drive, the passion, the desire, the idea and all of that, how does one get a team around yourself, right, who starts believing with the same intensity in the vision?
Sure.
Right, and then go ahead and convince customers, investors and so on. What would you got advice?
As an issue here, I would say that that's no different for an entrepreneur or for anybody who runs an organization to that extent. I'm sure all of us who've led organizations have really done them. And I can certainly say this with my Wipro days, with my earlier engineering days when I ran a company called Shriram Refrigeration, that you run it as an entrepreneur. So you really need to see how do you carry a team, how do you build a team. As an entrepreneur, you probably brought together a team of like-minded people, people who perhaps share your same thoughts, ideas, culture and vision. But then as your organization grows, you need to be able to build, I'd say two things. One is a shared vision, and then a common set of values along which the organization is aligned. I think it's important to articulate those. I think the shared vision part is important in the sense that it's not something created in an ivory tower or by the top management. I think the more you get the team to participate in that, in terms of saying what should be our, whether it's a vision or 5-year goals or whatever, define them together, share them and continuously communicate on them, and likewise bind the organization together through values along which the entire organization is aligned.
And that I imagine would be a constant.
It has to be a constant. You really never give up on doing that, and I'm sure from your own background of Wipro days where you would see Mr. Premji would have actually had sessions on what they called as the beliefs of the company. And he would personally handle it with literally every new joining until a few years back when I think it became too large and he delegated it. I did that all my 11 years at Mindtree, where I may have shared the odd session with one of the other co-founders. But I would have done 90% of saying virtually everybody who joins goes through a session on mission, vision, values. And even that is not enough. You've got to be able to build these up into the values, for example, could be something you bring into your 360 degrees appraisal system. A feedback system is not so much as an appraisal, where your peers are able to assess for you, and your team is able to assess how well do each individual within the team either align with those values and follow those values as a way they work.
All right. So effectively, which means a lot of communication, and a lot of iteration of
sure.
the goals and all of that.
And building it into your process.
In the process itself. What would you say, have been some of the key challenges or inflection points that you have faced in the course of the last 10, 11 years as part of your entrepreneurial journey?
Sure. Here, let me again step back and say, rather than what could have been my personal inflections, and I'll come back to that.
Sure.
Let me try and generalize this for the benefit of anybody who is looking at the journey of a company as they either started or whatever, and what are the typical inflection points the company may face. So I'd say that there are 3 phases or 4 phases in the life of a company. One is when you're in a startup phase, when you're literally scrambling, the success of the idea is not very clear in itself. You need an enormous amount of self-belief. You need the team to be cohesively working together to be able to achieve those. I would say that secondly, hopefully, and sometimes these may follow something like a technology curve, just when you begin to think that a new technology, you see those hype curves, where they just remain flat for a while, and they say this technology is not going to succeed, and then it takes off. And that tends to then happen in some idea which is going to take off, particularly when it's a new market, new idea in itself. It then takes off because it requires a certain amount of critical mass. And those are the rapidly growing years. I'll call those the years of adolescence though. It's heady, exciting, and yet it's also confused and mixed because a lot of different pulls and pressures, how to manage that growth, are coming about. And then comes the age when you become a steady, somewhat more mature organization. And that is when, unfortunately, when you think that you can now coast along, is when you have to completely reinvent yourself. So that becomes literally the 4th stage. And I think most organizations will go through that. Each of those stages will be marked by their own milestones and what you've called as inflection points. Along that way, some of the inflection points could be how you got your funding. A lot of inflection points today are introduced by the environment, and you've got to watch out for those. And they will impact different companies in different stages of this life cycle in a different way. Markets can come to virtually a stagnated halt in a recessionary condition. Sometimes though, I think you've got to realize that, and a lot of people ask me today, when you're starting a new IT company when there's a slowdown, we just say that's not my concern. I'm working in a $100 billion industry. And within that industry, I'm going to generate X million dollars of sales, whereas the larger companies are going to create a new mid-sized company every year. They're the ones who need to worry about the size of the money. And yet, one way or the other, the environment plays its role.
So that's the mindset, right? So the point that you made
Yeah.
is a very important issue relating to mindset.
Mhm.
Right? So how does one therefore translate that in terms of getting employees to also start believing that here is an opportunity? Because that I imagine would be a challenge of sorts for an entrepreneur as well.
Sure. Firstly to start with, I mean, and I'll touch for a moment on the philosophy behind Happiest Minds, where we are saying our mission is happiest people, happiest customers. And we've got a belief of saying that, that's really important. That has to be one of the purposes of your life, even while we're talking about it. Whether it is entrepreneurship, you asked about motivation. I think the basic motivation in one's life is what is it that makes me happy. Now, in that context, I think you've got to ask yourself, nobody can make anybody happy, you can only enable happiness. So therefore, when you say, how do you get some of that, those qualities brought together in the team, you can't make that happen. But I think you can create an environment whereby you enable that to happen. And you focus that, and again, it comes through also very largely an issue of sharing that vision continuously on an ongoing basis. There's another angle, of course, to it, and that's the pure monetary angle of saying, not by saying, hey, we're giving the highest salaries, but by saying that we're going to create a shared wealth and be able to say that everybody who participates to help in building up this gets a chance to be able to create wealth.
So that's a very important thing, particularly in our country, right? The whole business of being part of the entire wealth creation process.
Absolutely.
That's a very important part for an entrepreneur as well. Now let me move a little bit to the whole issue of raising funds, because you mentioned that is one of the important milestones in the journey of an entrepreneur, because there is a third-party validation.
Sure.
So what would your advice be to entrepreneurs who are out seeking funds? What kinds of investors, what are the attributes they should look out for, and some sort of insight into that process itself?
Okay. Actually, you're, of course, maybe it's not right. I was going to say you're the better person to do it, but you're on the other side of the thing. But you need good parties to help you, like Sanjay's own venture. But if I were to look at some characteristics, one thing I would tell you, and I've had until now maybe experience of dealing with 4 VCs directly and many others indirectly. And that could have included a larger private equity company when I talk about that. See, everybody will tell you that it's intelligent money, and whereas they have their own demands and expectations of you, I think you've got to assess that where is that intelligence. They won't commit to you in the way that you will have to commit to them on how they will be able to directly help you, but you should be able to get a good assessment on that. So what is their own ecosystem? How much can they help you to open doors? What is their own track record on the way they have supported entrepreneurs? And there can be some who have squeezed entrepreneurs into very difficult situations. I hate that horrible phrase of vulture capitalism. I'm sure you hate it even more. But because I have found that at least the people I've dealt with, excluding that large private equity entity, which I mentioned, I don't have to take their name, but it came to me, obviously, as a surprise. We did exceedingly well in our first rounds at Mindtree, and then somewhat burnt our fingers in that second round. Is that sometimes the smaller, closer guys will work with you closer. They'll help you more. They're more supportive. So you need to have that supportive attitude. You've got to have somebody who's there for the long run, not going to push you into saying, okay, it has to be that we go public or we find an exit strategy in X years. Perhaps not take advantage of, I'd say, the fact that there could be clauses where you get pushed into doing down rounds and things like that, or guard against that. You've got to be clear against as the VCs will protect their interest in that area. So if there is a need for a down round, obviously they will insist on it. I think that, so it's really just judging by that sort of culture. And I think then you've got to also tailor this in context of saying what is it that you're seeking, what is the appropriate ticket size that the VC entity is looking for, because everybody has their own appetite. And most of them would prefer to do it on a shared risk basis. So in any case, you're going to have to deal with 2 or sometimes even more than 2 parties. Right. And how well do they actually work together? Yeah. At the same time, you don't want them excessively generating that much wealth. There is them versus us in certain situations.
So that leads to an interesting point that all of a sudden you start a company, you've got a bunch of co-founders, and some key employees. Then you go out and you raise money, right? And then you have new stakeholders who, in a sense, you're answerable to. And then how does one go about this whole managing the board and the key stakeholders whose vision might not be entirely in congruence with your personal goals?
There are 2-3 angles of a board, and I'd say there's the board when you've got a private limited company, and then when you've been able to take this forward to a public limited entity. Odds are that when you're a private limited company, and I would say from our own experience, you may have a few internal people, a few senior people on the board, and it's not unlikely that there's nobody else on that board other than the VCs themselves. You could have brought in, as we have done at Happiest Minds, we brought in our financial advisor, Gopal, also as a board member because of the expertise he brings in. So in a sense, there are people who are very highly aligned to the fact that you've got to achieve results. So we're really working towards getting a goal. But even if you were to ask me what are some of the characteristics that you look for in a board member, or in a board as a whole when you're putting it together, this becomes much more applicable when you build a public limited board, as we did say in the case of Mindtree, or if I see the board that has existed at Wipro, which Mr. Premji would have created, but I was very much a part of the process of our board. One is, I'd say you should look for complementary skills and capabilities so that they're bringing in a variety of different types of skills to help enrich, because you really need capability in different aspects of running a business. So it's not that you just focus on somebody who knows the technology. There could be people who help you to open doors. I think at all times there must be people who built a reputation for a high standard of governance themselves. But they come from organizations which have built this up. And then hopefully you're going to get people who understand your own business and the businesses and business. Right. When you do that, they're more likely to understand the ups and downs of it rather than getting negative at times this happens. I can again say one thing from my own experience, that I'd say very high profile people, sometimes at a very high cost, because they have their own aspirations of what they come onto a board, don't necessarily translate into high value. So I'd be a little more cautious of it when I would do it next time around.
So you have to be very careful between balancing having board members who are brand names in and as of themselves, versus those who are willing to roll up the sleeves and do stuff for the entrepreneur.
Sure.
Okay. And in terms of spotting opportunities, so after Mindtree you started Happiest Minds. What was the real opportunity that you saw? Sure. What was the process you went through? And what would your advice be to entrepreneurs? How do you determine what is an opportunity?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you one comparison again between the time we started Mindtree and the time I started with Happiest Minds. There's a commonality in the entry strategy. At the time of Mindtree, the internet was booming. It was changing the world in many ways. Of course, some of it collapsed with the dot-com bust. But the fact is there was a new technology. That new technology became an entry strategy for a lot of companies. I think he has something he wants to ask you about. So I'll just repeat that a bit. The internet became an entry strategy. So what was it? There was something new. You could say the incumbents don't necessarily have more experience in that area. So it becomes a new entry point for a whole chunk of new entrants. The logic behind the areas that we focused at Happiest Minds was exactly the same. We said if the internet could spawn literally hundreds of companies around the world, why is it that the newer technologies today, and they're all disruptive technologies, cloud, mobility, social media, analytics, the changes in security requirements as arising out of the fact that security is no longer an enterprise issue, but literally taking you into your resources are outside of the cloud, you've got devices connecting to your organization through mobility, and social media is connecting you to maybe hundreds of thousands of millions of people. All of that imposes new security issues. Why is it that these have not become the focal point for a new entity? It's surprising it didn't happen. And so that becomes the entry strategy for Happiest Minds. So what's the principle behind it? The principle has to be, is there something new, which is either a new product, a new service, a new way of doing things, a different way of reaching your customer through channels which didn't exist in the past. I think there has to be something there that you pick up and say, I can do this differently, which doesn't place me at a disadvantage with respect to the incumbents.
Okay. And so if one looks at these new technologies and, like you said, determines what are therefore the new opportunities that get spawned by the new technologies, one of the important things that arise from that is how do I therefore take this proposition to the market, and the sales and marketing piece of it. And typically, companies that operate in India and from India tend, to be a little weak in sales and marketing compared to their Western counterparts. So what has been your own experience, and what would your suggestions and advice be?
Sure. Of course, a lot of people have asked me in the past, why is it that India hasn't created products? And the reason is not the capability to create the product. It is, as you have actually said, taking those into the market. And the reason, of course, is multiple. It may not necessarily be for marketing or sales capability, but in the case of a product, of course, it's a question of creating a global brand and the resources that you have. It's also fashion in a sense. People are going to align behind products which have been created in advanced markets. So, and yet you might say, the plus point I must tell you, I'm amazed, because of the entrepreneurial activity we have in our country, how many new product companies are coming in. And their companies, interestingly, when I talk of products, I will add on to that pure internet companies which are creating platforms on the basis of which the business runs.
Right.
And this is actually now a fantastic opportunity for us, for those companies, to actually overcome what you have called as the disadvantage that you perceived in the past. Because suddenly your market is the globe. You don't have to go through that physical process of saying, I'm going to step up offices in multiple countries, which each one of them requires a huge decision. When I talk of the mistakes made in the past, one of the most expensive mistakes you could make is when you choose the wrong person to represent you in the market. I would say when we entered into the UK and we chose the wrong guy, before you knew it, he'd set you back by £1 million. Not just in terms of the fact that what he cost us, but the opportunity cost might have actually run into £2 or £3 million by the time you found him out. Now if you can reach out to your customer through the net, you create a global market straight away. That's a fantastic opportunity which is available to everybody. We're no longer at a disadvantage. And in fact, you might say that we haven't created that physical brick and mortar. So industries which lend themselves to, I'd say, pure non-brick and mortar marketing should really take that whole hog and take it forward. Because that's where the growth lies. You look at any new industry. Take retail today, internet retail or online retail is growing at the rate of 20%, whereas the industry has been growing 3 to 4%. So that's where the opportunities lie. Avail of those, avail of new channels if you will. Now, having said that, there may be so many industries like ours where your real sales is going to happen on a face-to-face physical presence. And I think here the important aspect of this is, again, how do you bring across your differentiators? What is it that segregates? And once you've got that, you get that expertise. Some businesses are pure expertise based, so you have to get that expertise understood by the customer. That selling differentiator becomes.
And this is my last question before we throw it open to the audience. This extraordinary journey that you've been through, as a senior corporate executive, as a very successful entrepreneur, all of that. So what would you say, if you were to look back upon your own life and career, what would you say are the key reasons for your own success?
That must be the most difficult thing to do. And you saved the most tough one for the end. I'll tell you a few important things. I think you've got to enjoy what you're doing. And I think a corollary to that is when somebody asks me, hey, why do you choose to start a company again at literally becoming late stage serial entrepreneur? And that's because I enjoyed what I was doing. So if you got that, and you have a passion in a sense for that in itself, I think you're bound to be able to get success to a certain extent. But let me also now broaden the question and say, what is it that leads to creating a successful organization? You've got your idea. What is it that you need to be able to do to create success? And I would say there are 4 or 5 issues which are important. The first is building an organization. You've got to be able to do all that is needed to create your processes, your systems, obviously the right people, shared wealth creation, that becomes a very important thing. The second thing we've talked about is values and creating an organization which is aligned around the same set of values. The third, we've talked about funding for that matter, get your right funding strategy in place. The next one, we've talked about entry strategies. In a business, if you don't have the right entry strategy, and you've got to be clear that almost any differentiator that you create will at best last for 3 years. So barring soft differentiators, a cultural differentiator may last you forever, hopefully. But the technology differentiators or your market differentiators, you have to keep on reinventing yourself. I'd say, and then finally I would add one thing, you're also as weak as your weakest link. So while you're going to be strong, you can't say, you've got to have a few core competencies you build up, that is focusing on your successes. But also avoid those weakest links, or see how you're going to supplement them. Because you can't say that there's a given area that we are not good at. Any one of them could pull you down. A company with a poor people's focus, a company with a bad financial strategy, they may have the most wonderful technology, but if those are their weak links, those will lead to failure. So avoid some of the common things which could lead to failure and build on those factors which I've said lead to success.
So thanks